George. I've been a safety consultant for about a decade, and today I'd like to talk a bit about hazard assessment and its role in selection of PPE, as well as compare the various forms of respiratory protective equipment. So the first half of this video is going to look like very basic hazard assessment, and the second half is just going to be a comparison of the various forms of RPE or respiratory protective equipment. Now, whether you're using this for business or personal, it's important to understand the hazards to make sure you're adequately protected. So without further ado, let's talk hazard assessment. What is it? Well, if you're at home, this may look like having a solid understanding of what it is you're up to, the plan from start to finish, as well as having confidence in your knowledge to operate the equipment and all the tools necessary to complete your task. However, if we're talking from a corporate or a company perspective, the responsibility is going to be a little bit greater for all parties within your organization, management, supervisors, and workers included. Now, if I'm a worker, what this may look like is, again, I have a solid plan. I'm familiar with the policies, procedures, and forms in regards on how to execute that plan. And again, I have all the appropriate and pertinent training. If I'm a supervisor, this may involve making sure all my workers have the proper mentorship, tutelage, and training, as well as all the tools and equipment they need to properly perform their task competently. If I'm part of the management team, this will entail making sure that my management system is established, communicated, and being followed throughout my organization. So how exactly do I perform a hazard assessment? Well, as I've alluded to and mentioned, you want to be familiar with all the ins and the outs and all the task steps and everything that goes along with that. So for example, if I have to use any piece of equipment or tools, again, I'm properly trained on how exactly to use that. And this applies, all the way from the doctor's office to the construction site to oil and gas. So now that we're familiar with all our policies, procedures, forms, we have the appropriate training, mentorship, and we know what it is we're doing out there. There's kind of two components to hazard assessment. The formal one, as we talked about, but the informal is going to be extremely important as well, and that is taking a look in real time at the field situations or the present situations and circumstances and determining what hazards may come out of that or what hazards are presented as not only an inherent risk of performing your task, but the circumstance situation. Maybe that's the physical location, maybe that's other workers in the area, maybe that's COVID-19. So again, you need to use both of these together to perform a quality hazard assessment. And once you have the results, you can then move forward in selecting the appropriate personal protective equipment for your hazards. Also, from a corporate perspective, it's going to be very important to understand your legislative obligations as they pertain to your organization and your work operation. Anywhere, in the world, there's going to be safety standards. For the most part, there's going to be safety standards that pertain to you. So again, you need to understand exactly what they are and exactly what you're doing to fulfill those obligations or responsibilities. If I'm here in Alberta, Canada, this may involve making sure it's documented, having the date, making sure I clearly identify the work steps, the hazards, and the solutions or controls to mitigate these hazards, and make sure that they're clearly communicated to other workers and other crews. You may also want to consider that more than one level of legislation may apply or pertain to your particular project or work scope. If you're working anywhere in Canada, there's going to be federal, provincial, and municipal legislation that will all apply to your particular project and maybe change some subtleties in execution. Now, if you're located pretty much anywhere in North America or the UK, there's going to be a hierarchy of controls, and they may differ slightly, but the thought behind them is the same. Now, the first up on the hierarchy of controls is going to be elimination. Is there any way that I could eliminate this particular hazard from my tasking? An example of elimination may be moving an aerial work process to the ground, or even removing a protruding nail from a wall. Next up is substitution. What this may look like is maybe switching a hazardous product out for another hazardous product that does the same job that has far less of an adverse health impact. Now, substitution is considered to be on even keel or the same as engineering, which is a physical change. An example of a physical change or engineering controls would be, guardrails on mezzanine platforms, ventilation, things that are more or less human-proof. Next up, we have administrative controls. These are going to be anything that's paper or process related. That's going to be your policies, procedures, and forms, hazard assessment, again, anything governed by a process. Now, the last and least effective control measure is going to be personal protective equipment, but I do need you to consider that mostly every situation or circumstance that you consider, there's a combination of these working together. So, for example, if I'm going to pull out a piece of respiratory protective equipment, a half mask, full mask, quarter mask, whatever the case is, there's also going to be administrative procedures that govern the use of that as well. So everything is kind of a combination working together again to control or eliminate or reduce the hazards presented in any situation or circumstance. If you do require more information on hazard assessment, please click the link now, and this will take you to our in-depth hazard assessment video, which will just give you a bit more background and education and kind of break down hazard assessments and exactly why we do them and everything from A to Z. Now that we have the basics of hazard assessment, let's put it all together with a real-world example. So let's say that I'm going to be cutting some concrete or tile as part of a home renovation, or let's say I do this for work. Now, cutting the material is going to generate particulates. I can assume that I'm going to breathe that in. So I first want to consider engineering or ventilation, and then I want to consider, what processes I have in place, and then we move to PPE. So in selection of the cartridges or what kind of PPE, I do want to consider the type of particulate being generated. I would take a look at the SDS, determine what particulates are being generated, and choose a filter that would protect against that particular contaminant, particle, or hazard. It'd be the same in medical depending on the hazards, the risks, and the contact levels. Another important element to consider when selecting personal protective equipment, or particularly respiratory protective equipment, is assigned protection factor. Now, what this number represents is basically the level of protection in which you can expect your respiratory protective equipment to provide. You would then use this number to make sure that you have the appropriate piece of respiratory protective equipment selected for the hazards presented. It's also important to consider that any piece of respiratory protective equipment, in addition to training, is going to require a fit test. Now, what is a fit test? 10,000 mile view. A fit test just basically makes sure that your facial profile suits the piece of respiratory protective equipment that you're trying to get into. Because again, a whole lot of different face shapes out there. Not all of them will fit the same mask. So we just want to make sure that people are safe and adequately protected. All right, folks, what we're going to get into next is a table comparison of the various types of respiratory protective equipment that are out there. Now we've thrown them all in a nice convenient table for you. We're going to assume that everyone is fit tested, and again, you're well trained, you know what a code of practice is, you know what the policies, procedures, forms look like, and again, what's expected of you as far as respiratory protective equipment is concerned. All right, so we are going to start out with the quarter mask. May have seen this everywhere because of COVID-19, but typically most common in doctors' office, nurses wear them 24/7, as well as any medical care facility or seniors care facility. Now, these quarter masks have an assigned protection factor of about 5, so yes, they do protect respiratory just a little bit. But again, if you're on any kind of job site, work site, you're going to want to consider something bigger and badder. Or if you're in medical and you're in constant contact with individuals that are infected with COVID-19. Which brings us to our half masks. So with these, you'll notice a slightly higher assigned protection factor, and you just simply choose the cartridge that is appropriate for the hazards presented as we discussed. Now, if you do pick up something like a 60926, what a solution like this does is 11 separate items in addition to the P100 filtration. You can pick up some solutions that are fairly robust that do a little bit of everything. And if you'd like more info on the 60926, you can click here now. Next up, we have the full face mask. So as you can see, we're moving higher in the echelons of protection. Assigned protection factor of 50, so that's going to be much, much greater. And again, does require a fit test. Now, this also does eye protection as well, and these visors are going to be rated similarly to your average grinding shield. So it does provide respiratory and eye protection as well, which is what may particularly make this such a great solution for a lot of job sites out there, as well as medical. Next up, we have the PAPRs, that stands for Powered Air Purifying Respirator. So what these are compact systems that filter ambient air through a filter of your choosing, pumping them into a head top of your choosing. Now there's many different head tops out there. We have a whole other video dedicated to that because there's just so many, and it's important that you select the right one for your particular application. Now that being said, you'll notice that it does head protection, eye protection, will do hearing protection as well. You pair them up with some ear defenders as well as the respiratory. Now you'll notice that the assigned protection factor is variable, and here's why. I mentioned that you can pair them up with different kinds of head tops, which will provide varying degrees of protection. Not only this, but the PAPRs as well as the full face masks can also be paired up with an external air source or supplied air. And again, depending on your setup, that can boost your assigned protection factor all the way up to 1,000. And another big advantage is you don't need to be clean shaven or have a fit test performed to wear the PAPR because it's a positive pressure system. If you'd like more info on PAPRs, you can click here now or follow us through till the end for all of the links. Now, in summary, it really depends on what your hazards are out there, as discussed. Now, we do recommend PAPRs for quite a few frequent operations because they do provide the most robust protection and they are quite easy to run, as well as a very popular choice for medical and military, especially during COVID times. But again, this is going to come down to your hazard assessment, risk tolerance, and perhaps company as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. So if you'd like more information, feel free to visit us online, paPRsolutions.com. We cover not only respiratory protective equipment, safety equipment at large, safety tips for consultants coming soon, and much, much more, as well as rentals and service. You can click here now for more information on that. You can click here now for information on our shops, as well as we have bulk discounts. So if you're interested in bulk discounts, you're a company and you're looking to maybe supply your team with some affordable PPE, quality affordable PPE, you can click here now for the bulk discount section. Again, good day, and thank you for your time.